My name is Glenn Warren. I'm the Vice President of the California School Library Association. How many of you are familiar with libraries? Have you heard of these things? I know they're hard to find now because we don't need them in education anymore. Yeah, because see, now that we've got Google, we don't need libraries, right? Now, did I tell you, for those of you who aren't fans of sarcasm or humor, this is going to be a difficult presentation for you. Because I was born in New Jersey, I was raised with Southern parents, and I got beat up a lot growing up. So I'm just going to put that out there. So hopefully you have a little compassion for the lackluster presentation skills that I have. Now, with that said, this presentation is titled From the Required Curriculum to the Desired Curriculum. And to be very clear about, or trying to be clear about what that means, I'm in K-12 education. How many of you are higher ed folks? Okay, and how many of you are K-12 people? Okay, so much of what I say will probably resonate with the K-12 folks, but you know what? You higher ed folks inherit our K-12 folks. That's what I heard. So they come out of our system and they come to you. So we should matter to each other. And I think that's one of the reasons why this event has been weaved with K-12 and higher ed. I think in the past it's been primarily higher ed. Is that correct for those of you who've been around? And if you don't know, I'm just going to say that that's a fact until somebody calls me out on the research, where I will have to confess as a teacher or librarian, which I am, that I have no citation to support that. Now, with that said, I would like to also share with you that there is a teeny URL that's right up here on the screen. Is there, I get nervous. Is there a screen there? Yes. Is my name up there? Fabulous. Okay, great.
It's in presentation.
It's not in presentation.
Viewer tools.
You see my viewer tools?
Yeah.
You see, you're not supposed to see that. Yeah, I'm sure. I already like this presentation. I like where it's going. All right, let's see. How about now? Well, thank you for helping me. I appreciate that. All right, so you can see that teeny URL down there at the bottom. Feel free to download this. This presentation is available for you to download. Feel free, if you find any redeeming factors in it, feel free to change the name and put your own on there and call it your own, because I am declaring it as the creator of this public domain. So have fun with it. I think, though, it is only fair that if you get in trouble, it's important to cite me as the reference. And if you get praised, make sure you leave me out of the citation. All right. Moving beyond the regurgitation of knowledge, K-12 teachers, sorry? Oh, okay. K-12 teachers will, I hear a lot, this statement. That sounds great, but I don't have time for that. Does that sound familiar? Oh, that sounds wonderful, but I don't have time for that. Well, you know, we could do this creative thing. Yeah, but I don't have time for that. Who has pacing guides? Who feels a sense of even further lockstep in how we have to present education? See, I'm not sure if I'm presenting or preaching this morning or this afternoon, but either way, it doesn't matter to me because it's all very important. When we talk about online learning is happening in a context. And the one thing we need to realize, and I think hopefully today I'll give more than enough evidence to support what I'm sharing with you, is in K-12 education, we're seeing that standardized testing, and I'm not coming against it or coming against No Child Left Behind, I'm not doing any of that. I'm just simply saying life does not consist of A, B, C, D answers. How many of you found that out? And the reality is that we're preparing our kids to produce data, and that data is how we're going to be judged. So what we do is we make sure they get that knowledge. And even with online learning, we can actually individualize the instruction for the specific child to make sure they get that required learning. Now, that's an advantage of online learning that takes us a little bit further than what a face-to-face context can do. Because in online learning, there can be a response to where the child's or the student's understanding is, and can adjust for that understanding and address those areas of the required curriculum where they're deficient. So there is a big advantage. I think Brian Bridges will be talking about that. Maybe he's talking about it right now somewhere. He is the director of CLearn, which is the California Learning Resource Network. Anyway, the point being is that even with that wonderful advantage of online learning that we can individualize for the student, the bottom line is that the outcome of that is not really any different than what's happening in face-to-face learning, in that we're preparing them to take a test. We're preparing them to get the content. We're preparing for them to be able to answer the question and answer it right so we can keep our funding or keep our classes. So here's the background. As a result of that specific reality, that we are preparing kids to be regurgitationers of information. I call it bulimic education. We are finding that we're noticing there's a critical thinking crisis. And I'll share with you the evidence of that. We also see that where kids they may be digital natives, but they are not digitally literate. They're we need to prepare our kids to be information and digital literate. We also see the Common Core standards, how many of you are familiar with the Common Core? The Common Core standards are attempting to say, wait a minute, we need to do a little bit better connection between the content areas. Are you familiar with that reality of the Common Core? The idea that we've got to be more horizontal. We've been so darn vertical. We siloed ourselves from each other. And there needs to be this connection between the different content areas. We're also going to share with you about legislation and ed code that supports what I'll be sharing with you today, and also the model school library standards and the role of the teacher librarian in the 21st century. Before I get started, as I get started, I want to show you a quick TED video. I'm not going to let you see the whole thing, but it's really terrific. Dr. Brown, she was talking about the power of vulnerability, and she made a comment in her presentation that said, if it can't be measured, then it doesn't exist. And I want to share with you that by the way, I don't believe that for 1 second, but she did. And she is now confessing her sins in front of the TED conference.
So I'll start with this. A couple of years ago, an event planner called me because I was going to do a speaking event. And she called and she said, I'm really struggling with how to write about you on the little flyer. And I thought, well, what's the struggle? And she said, well, I saw you speak, and I'm going to call you a researcher, I think, but I'm afraid if I call you a researcher, no one will come because they'll think you're boring and irrelevant. And I was like, okay. And she said, but the thing I liked about your talk is, you're a storyteller, so I think what I'll do is just call you a storyteller. And of course, the academic, insecure part of me was like, you're going to call me a what? And she said, I'm going to call you a storyteller. And I was like, oh, why not Magic Pixie? I was like, I don't know. Let me think about this for a second. And so I tried to call deep on my courage. And I thought, I am a storyteller. I'm a qualitative researcher. I collect stories. That's what I do. And maybe stories are just data with a soul, and maybe I'm just a storyteller. So I said, you know what? Why don't you just say I'm a researcher storyteller? And she went, there's no such thing. So I'm a researcher storyteller. And I'm going to talk to you today. We're talking about expanding perception. And so I want to talk to you and tell some stories about a piece of my research that fundamentally expanded my perception and really actually changed the way that I live and love and work and parent. And this is where my story starts. When I was a young researcher, doctoral student, my first year I had a research professor who said to us, here's the thing, if you cannot measure it, it does not exist.
Now, I'm not going to play this whole video for you. It's linked and you can download it and watch it yourself. It's worth your time, I believe. She comes through a journey where she starts with what you see on the screen, that belief. And she comes to understand in a profound way that's wrong. And in education right now, if you can't measure it, you don't value it. Tell me I'm wrong. Somebody, please. Because I'd like to stop having to do this. But the reality is that if it isn't measured, it isn't valuable. How many of you know there's some things that aren't measured that are pretty valuable? Anybody married here? Yes. Okay. I have a wife, thank God, And there are some things in our relationship she had better not measure. She has no business measuring them. Right? Are those things important? Of course they're important, whatever those things are. I'll leave it to your imagination what those things are. But the fact of the matter is that there are things in our life that matter so much, and we cannot measure them. Before I leave each day, I do not say to my child, or my wife, or my kids, I don't say, I want to teach you a little something before I leave. No, what I tell them is I love them before I leave. I always do. I love you. What are they learning? Nothing. Why do that? Because I'm reminding them of something that is valuable. And you know what? It's really kind of hard to measure, isn't it? Now, with that said, somebody's going to go, oh my gosh, this guy's a 60s guy? Here's the reality our kids are living in. They're living in an information realm environment. I'm going to play this for you, just again for context. This comes out of the 21st Century Fluency Project. Check this out. That's in 2009. Check this out. Those of you who love to print everything, because I just can't deal with it once it's printed. Check it out. We would deforest the plant 12 times over. Can't even print it. Kids are completely developing information. Absolutely. Information of the Fluency Project. What that really is a highfalutin name for just information literacy. And I want to share with you, as of this August, almost a year ago, the State Board of Education in the state of California passed the Model School Library Standards. And one might say, well, what relevance does that have to online education? What relevance does it have to this conference? That is why I'm here. I'm here to share with you why that's relevant. It's the reason I'm standing here is to say there is a huge relevance to this. It's extremely important. In fact, I think it's of critical importance to our democracy, frankly. And in those standards, they range between kindergarten all the way through 12th grade, and have learning outcomes for each specific grade level. And in each of those grade levels, it talks about the same thing over and over again: how to access information, evaluate information, use information, and integrate information literacy into all areas of learning. Now, when that passed, I realized that people needed a kind of an easy way to remember this and what this represents. And as you create online classes, as you create online content, you really try to keep the vowels in mind. In other words, you're always thinking about content, reading, writing, and arithmetic, all the consonants of it only. But we're talking not about consonants, we're talking about vowels. And what are the vowels? A, E, I, O, U. Your students need to be supported, not necessarily explicitly taught, but in your course, if this is missing, you don't have information literacy present, that's a problem. You need to be concerned about kids' access, their access, how they evaluate, how they integrate it. Kids are becoming originators of information. The reality is, I had a 6th grader, this is years ago, I had a 6th grader hand in a report. He cited it perfectly, he paraphrased it, he did not copyright it, but the information was bold-faced crazy. And I went to go check his source, and he did everything right. He did a great job of quoting a 2nd grader's website. So again, the idea that while kids are now publishing information, you talk about the environment, not polluting the environment. Do you realize as our kids create information, they could be creating information pollution? How many have been receivers of information pollution? So, again, there's a deal. So let's talk about context of creating online classes. First of all, Ed Code 18101 says that we shall, all schools shall, have rules and regulations for school library services. In other words, we need to teach the very things that I just shared with you. Well, Glenn, that's all very nice and good. Those are your librarians. Got rid of our librarians years ago. This is not relevant to me. I'm online. I've got Google. We don't need you. Okay. At the end of the Schwarzenegger administration, Executive Order S0609 was passed, and it is still in place, and it is going forward with Governor Brown. And it is the Digital Literacy Pathways Report. And it said in the executive order they will establish a definition for digital literacy. They will identify strategies on how to incorporate it, including how it will be incorporated into K-12 higher ed, and higher ed, and the acceptable frameworks and assessments. So as a result of that, the ICT, Information Communication Technologies Literacy Leadership Council for the state of California, finally landed on a definition for digital literacy, and you're looking at it. It's not long, it's short. Let's take a look at what the definition says. A lifelong process of capacity building for using digital technology, communication tools, and/or networks in creating, analyzing, managing, integrating, evaluating, and communicating information in order to function in a knowledge-based society. Isn't it interesting if we take a look at those points that digital literacy, as the state has defined it, it sounds very familiar to the strands that the Model School Library Standards provide. Well, while that was going on, we turned to the University of California system, and we asked the University of California, would they please provide us with a statement for or against why information literacy is necessary in K-12. And I want you to see what they said. Every single campus of the Library Association of the University of California, every single campus stated in their official resolution, here's just I'm not giving you the whole thing, but just a little bit of it. It says, whereas students are overwhelmed with information of all sorts and need guidance in learning how to become information literate so that they can identify, locate, and evaluate and use information effectively and ethically, and it just goes on and on, but it ends here. Finally, let it be resolved that the Librarian Association of the University of California affirms the great value of school librarians and up-to-date professionally managed school libraries for the preparation of California students for information researching in higher education institutions and to be informed participation in a democratic society. All right, well, that was really terrific. Well, there's still more context. So now you got the librarians barking about information literacy, which is not surprising because that's what they do. Now you've got the University of California saying, yeah, our students are not prepared. They're just not prepared. They don't know how to go after information. They don't know how to truly do inquiry-based learning. There's no time for that. Because it's not required. So some guy who's not an educator, but is a politician, just this year came up with a brand new bill called SB 402. Are you ready for this? This just shows you where we're going and how bad it's gotten. When you've got a politician who is now passing legislation that looks like this. Let's take a look. This bill required each curriculum framework to describe. Now that says each curriculum framework. How many frameworks is that? That would be all of them. To describe how content can be delivered to intentionally build creativity, innovation, critical thinking, problem solving, collaboration, and communication into and across each content area to the extent described is deemed appropriate by the state board. Now, does this guy know what he's doing? I'm not going to argue the point. The reality is that you can see there's a swell of populace and education outcry saying, we've got to leave room for critical thinking, inquiry, and we've got to prepare these kids not just how to regurgitate the information they have to perform with, but we have to equip them to be users of that information, integrators of that information, evaluators, God, for certain evaluators of that information. And so, there's that. Along with that, we've got federal and state legislation that says that we have to teach our kids cyber safety and citizenship. Who's got time for that in K-12? But again, we've got legislation in the state level and the federal level. SB 307 says that we will teach kids K through 12 about copyright issues, intellectual property. We will teach kids about how to integrate information. We will teach them about how not to be a cyberbully. That legislation is 4 years old. We have federal legislation that's about 2 years old that says that we will teach our kids how to do social networking, chat rooms, and how not to be a cyberbully. I'm assuming when it says cyberbullying, it's not teaching them how to be a cyberbully. But the funny thing is, if we're supposed to teach them how to use social networking, how many in K-12 have social networks completely blocked? You know what that's like? It's like trying to teach a kid how to swim, but we won't use water because it's too darn dangerous. Is this being recorded? I'm on the record. Now, information literacy is the idea of connecting across the curriculum. So, in your content areas, you have to be an expert at what you do. Lord knows, you've got to be. But you need somebody to help be that horizontal teacher. I always was really proud of saying this about myself. I'm not a vertical teacher, I'm a horizontal teacher. I go this way. And that's what TLs are supposed to do, teacher librarians. Moving on. Anyway, these are the multiple stakeholders that came together and said, this has got to be done. We've got to do this. Now, before we go any further, CLearn is the state of California's official agency now for judging online courses. Are you familiar with this? Okay, one of you are, okay? Now, I'm not going to argue the validity or what that means. I'm just saying that they're evaluating online courses. And there were 52 criteria for how an online course was to be evaluated. And CLearn was very solid in feeling those 52 standards were plenty. But the state of California came in and said to CLearn, you are going to add one more. We're going to make it 53? Yeah. Well, what is it? The state demanded that now all online courses will include in those standards how they will be evaluated, information literacy. And I am the one actually now training their evaluators. And I've told them, look for at least a whiff of information literacy in your courses. I didn't say identify it, I just said, can you smell it? So this is relevant for us here. So let's take a look at what information literacy means for us. One, it means to access information. the students need to understand it and recognize a need to go after information. Not information just handed to them by their teacher or their professor, but go after that information independently to formulate their own questions, utilize resources, and retrieve that information responsibly. The E is the idea of critical thinking. I'm sure higher ed is fully aware, and even high school teachers are fully aware of how really anemic our students are in this area. The idea even considering the credibility of an author. How many of you know more of our students could probably use to stand to ask the question, is this person credible? Accuracy of the information. Was it recent? And also relevance to the inquiry. Are they finding information that connects to their question? The integration of that information is, which is, I find amazing. We now have a state standard from K through 12th grade that asks this question. What is the student's personal interest? It's a standard. It's the fourth strand of this model school library standards. We actually made it official where are we asking the student, what are you interested in? Now, you'll say, well, wait a minute, I teach biology, or I teach this. I'm not interested in what they're interested in. That could be a problem in your pedagogy. Did you hear what I said? If you're not interested in what your students are interested in, there could be a disconnect. In fact, there is a disconnect. So, personal interest, making connections. You know, the more divergent the connections, the more powerful the thinking. How do we respond to that information and sharing that information publicly? Moving on, authorship, the originate information. Are they drawing conclusions? Are they being creative? And are they able to discern the difference between their own original product and stealing something you wrote or somebody else wrote? How many of you see plagiarism going on in your classes? Okay, it's not enough to dock their score because they plagiarized. There's a bigger issue there. The bigger issue is, across the board, we haven't presented it to the kids or the students as being important. And then finally, the use of information, making informed decisions, safety and privacy issues. You know, how many of you have loved the idea of using online courses to have kids work collaboratively? Isn't that fabulous? The collaboration opportunities are amazing. But if our students aren't prepared to respect the privacy not only of themselves, but also of the people in the collaborative groups. You know, when a collaborative group is talking, how many of you have ever had a teacher's lounge conversation and one of your fellow cohorts let that spill out into the public? Nobody? Okay, I have. And what happens is you have this conversation where you don't want that, if you want to have an open conversation, but it wasn't meant for the public. When kids are having those conversations, or students are having those conversations, and even online, it's important it doesn't end up on their Twitter or end up on a Facebook account. In other words, when we're working collaboratively, we have to discern, is this in class or is this for the public? And also, again, to us to respect intellectual freedom. How many often will have a student ask a question that really frustrates you a bit in your teaching? But it's a challenge. Those are moments to live for. But sometimes they're hard to recognize because sometimes a kid will come from or a student will come from a very unique perspective and you don't get it at first. But we want to advance the idea of intellectual freedom. So finally, the University of California has defined it this way. What is the reward of information literacy in our courses? It's this: an information literate populace able to make informed decisions based on a variety of carefully weighed evidence. And that should be in how many of our courses? Well, thank you. I feel like we did have church there. That's very nice. Okay. Now that we have, where's the organ? Somebody said there would be an organ. I don't see an organ here. Now, there's the AEIOUs. We went over that. And now just briefly, I want to go through this. I'm going to open up for any questions you might have for me. But I want to show you a little framework that we're working on. And this is in its infancy stage. And if you'd like to contribute to this work, we'd be glad to have you. The required curriculum is the stuff, it's called required because you have to do it. Do you understand what required means? Required is you have to do it. So if you're teaching biology, what do you have to do? Teach biology. If you're teaching chemistry, what do you have to do? Teach chemistry. Are there tests? Is there going to be evaluations? You bet. Are they going to have to perform those tests? You bet. So that's required. But let's not ditch the desired curriculum. And I'm going to just give you a little bit of a framework that we're working through right now, and you could add to and detract from if you like. But here's some examples. One is position and power. One of the first things we teach kids, what is your title? That's what matters. Is this person credible? But another the desired side of it is, what principle are you working from? What is your passion? And that's a key question that we need to be asking kids, and we just don't seem to have time to ask that question. Another example is how are we doing on things measured? We're measuring things fine. We're doing a great job on the measuring. How many of you run data director reports? Oh, are we doing a great job? Wow. But the thing is, we're doing great on the nuts and bolts, but guess what we're doing poorly on? The heart and soul of it. I love the statement from a woman on the TED video I showed you earlier, Dr. Rees. She said, it's data with a soul. Right now, we just got data. We need data with a soul. And somebody going, what the heck does that mean? I don't have time. And plus, I wouldn't even know how to answer the question because I'm not that smart. Okay, next. We want kids to be geniuses. We want them to master the data. We want them to get A's. How many of you love seeing kids get A's on your tests? Okay, some of you don't because you're sadistic, but that's okay. But yeah, I love seeing the kids get A's. And we're really asking, how much of a genius are you? But the desired curriculum is, are we taking away their ability to be who they are? We also need to advance the idea for you to be genuine. How many of you would like to have a little bit more genuineness in your work? With your colleagues, with your administrators, with the district? How many of you think we need a big injection of genuine? This won't hurt a bit. Okay, now, moving on. Another thing that we absolutely have to have is success. If you're not successful, you may lose your job. So success results determine if it was worth doing. If I'm going to try something out. Well, if it's successful, then we'll keep doing it. We'll know it was worth it. And that's where we are so anchored right now in the requirement of being successful. But yet, in our courses, are we advancing an idea of significance with the kids? Is this worth doing regardless of the outcome? How many of there's been some pretty important people who did something that completely failed with the public, but later others figured out later they were right? See, if they were success-based, they never would have done that. But these people were significance-based. Well, can we advance that in our courses? You bet we can. How about this one? I love this, my favorite one. We want people to be flawless. Perfect score. But how many of you are flawed? We also need to teach the idea that you don't have to project yourself as being perfect everywhere. You are a human being, and being flawed is part of it. I put this one in here, is the idea of funding and fasting. Sometimes it's the same thing. But, money determines actions. How many of you seen this at work, this principle at work? Money is determining what action we take. How many of you know that's not the way we should be doing things? Money should not be determining our action. Guess what should be? It's the principle, the passion, the reality, that ethical passion that says, you know what, I'm hungry for the right thing. I'm hungry to get back to the soul of why I signed up for education in the first place. And then finally, of course, the idea of external expectations of others, but also the idea of building that internal, personal expectation. Well, I've shared with you the following. That there are standards that say we have to equip kids to go after things they want to go after. We have to equip kids to be users, integrators, evaluators, originators of information. We talked about how politicians right now have legislation that are going to demand that all of our courses show some level of this in what we're doing. I've also shared with you that CLearn is now evaluating online courses by asking the question, is what I just shared with you anyway present in the courses that we're creating? And then bottom line, I appeal to you as teachers. Just because it went online doesn't mean if we see flaws in the face-to-face arena that says all the wrong things, why would we use this opportunity of this new pioneering area and advance the same old oppression in this 21st century environment? We have a chance to change education. And I am a person who believes that we can. I appreciate your time and your attention, and I'm now going to take any complaints or concerns that you have, but thank you very much. Any questions?
What is C-Learn?
C-Learn is the California Learning Resource Network. Oh, I thought I was off the clock. Okay, yes. C-Learn is the California Learning Resource Network.
And they are sponsored by CDE?
Yeah, there's a variety of different funding. CTAP helps, they have a variety of different funding sources, but they work very closely with the California Department of Education. To give you some background, you guys remember the digital textbook piece, the free digital textbook piece? Guys, some of you in high school may have heard of that. That whole thing, all the free digital textbooks were being evaluated by C-Learn. Okay.
So if a high school puts together a online course, these guys have to evaluate it?
They will evaluate it, or they should be submitted for their evaluation. So there's some other, it's really kind of loose right now, like a lot of these things. Let me answer it this way, that there's some other legislation coming down the pike, like AB 802, which I think is hilarious if you think about it in terms of the 802 EEE standard. But anyway, 802 is talking about how we redetermine ADA money, and that online learning will get the same ADA money that a face-to-face situation is. That legislation's in play, and if that passes, and they're looking about a year to 2 year time frame for that, then that will become critically important, the C-Learn piece, because then the state will say, like, you know how they used to evaluate textbooks, which we're not doing anymore because we're not buying textbooks anymore? That will become more strongly into play in determining if you get independent study money or full-bore ADA money. Did that make any sense, by the way?
C-Learn is basically going to have a crossover effect on you.
It might. I'm not saying it will, it might. And it will be, the courses will be officially identified by the state as being approved courses, whatever that means. And I don't know what that means, and neither do they yet. Questions? More questions? Well, very good. I do appreciate your time, and again, I'm going to go and try to catch a plane. For those of you who are not faithful type church-going folks, think good thoughts for me. And those of you who are, pray I don't miss that plane. Okay, thanks.